Director General Jayant Prasad, my old and former colleague, friend, Ambassador Ghare Khan, Professor Muni and Mr. Uday Bhaskar, I don't see, perhaps they have not arrived as yet. Distinguished participant from the key countries which are involved with the Istanbul process, scholars of IDSA, ladies and gentlemen. I greatly appreciate Ambassador Prasad asking me to be here this morning. By all accounts, I am no expert on any of the issues that he has referred to just now, but perhaps I have the relative advantage of several years, long years, if I may say so, 3 decades of involvement with affairs of Kashmir, and much longer involvement with the developments in our country, which get covered by these two terminologies, radicalization and terrorism. I've seen the emergence of these two phenomena over the years since I joined service in the late 50s. As regards Afghanistan, this is not the occasion, and I don't pose to have any special knowledge. But I would only say that our long, centuries-old historic relations with this country, which is truly the heart of Asia, civilizational, foundational relations, and my own association in a formal official capacity when I was in service of carrying out certain activities in Afghanistan. We built a very useful hospital there many years ago. I was involved in that. It's most unfortunate, in fact, it's sad beyond words, the destruction which has taken place in this great country, the destruction of people, their properties, their civilization. So it is not a mere seminar subject to discuss terrorism and radicalization. Terrorism has done untold damage over the past several decades. We have been victims. We have been complainants. We've gone through a long process of telling the rest of the world what all this is about. At the time that I was involved in official capacity, and Ambassador Ghare Khan was serving the country abroad and then in the United Nations, there were no takers. Nobody would waste time on hearing our story. I heard a patent remark which both in the European context and the American context was a very derogatory passing observation to failures of governance when we complained about terrorism, radicalization, these armed militancies which were being sponsored from across the borders. We heard these remarks in a very contemptuous kind of manner. So I would say in brief, Ambassador Prasad, that whatever I say here arises essentially from my personal experiences. It is not as a government spokesman that I am here today. I speak from personal experiences spreading over a very long period. I think the first thing to which I would like to mention in the context of terrorism, insofar as India is concerned, is that with a population of near 1.3 billion, we are perhaps the most multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious nation in the world. There is no world religion which is not practiced in India. We have 150 odd languages. We have 1,000 odd dialects. And we have socio-religious and socio-cultural traditions which go back to thousands of years of recorded history. In the total freedom that our democracy allows, we have a free play of all kinds of forces and factors and influences which sometimes clash, which lead to conflicts, which lead to confrontations. But nonetheless, we remain a truly democratic nation with great, deep belief in the principle of secularism, inclusiveness. Aberrations are there, here and there. Such a large country is bound to be. From time to time, we see examples of where we have failed. But if you look back over the last 70 years of our democratic evolution, all our election processes in the states and to the parliament been peaceful. The transitions in our country from one regime to another has been orderly and peaceful. So in this context, and with a Muslim population of 185 million, we have a large stake. We have great worries, great concerns, grave worries when we talk of radicalization. We have Indian Muslims all over the world. We have Indian Muslim expatriates of over 7 million in the Middle East. Just imagine, it's not a small number. So we just cannot live with radicalization of any kind, much less with terror. But we have witnessed terror for the last several decades now. And we've also witnessed the lack of any meaningful, well-considered support from elsewhere when it comes to dealing with terrorism. So I would say, yet once again, to reiterate that radicalization in the Indian context is a threat to the very unity and integrity of our nation. We cannot allow such a large community amongst the many communities in our country to go in any direction except in the direction which their faith has permitted and allowed over the centuries. The true, actual faith, the conventional, traditional Islam, is not what we see today. And that is what Ambassador Prasad just referred to, what has happened in the years past. If one doesn't go by specific dates, one could say that perhaps 1990 marks a milestone when our Western neighbors started a proxy war in Kashmir. Radicalization had commenced some times earlier than that and picked up pace after this happened and has been going on since then. This proxy war in Kashmir has taken away over 45,000 lives, over 22,000 innocent civilian lives, and well over 5,500, nearly 6,000 members of the security forces laid down their lives. But this proxy war continues. Today's newspapers, if you've seen, only yesterday there's a serious incident of cross-border terrorism, which has led to the loss of several lives. So this goes on while we discuss various matters in an academic, quasi-academic manner. This reality continues. Now, while Ambassador Prasad has very sharply listed some of the salient points in today's discussion which will take place in the rest of the day. I would say in a general manner, in a general way, that the mythology which has been created and disseminated and propagated is that insofar as Kashmir is concerned, that the government of India or the Union at the center, the federal authorities, have only one objective, that is to destroy the Muslim identity in Kashmir. Incidentally, in the valley today, over 99% of the population is one community. So this demonization has taken place over the last several decades, and the traditional call that is made, appeal which is made, an appeal which is very appealing, is to join the community of the faithful, be one with the Ummah, work towards the law of the Sharia, and in more recent years, join the jihad, the holy war, for the installation of the caliphate. This entire business has over the years seen the methodical erosion of our historical traditional values, which the journalistic world refers summarily to briefly Sufism. I would say Sufism, yes, Sufi philosophy more prominently, particularly, but traditional Islam values, religious values, cultural values, social values, those have been eroded and destroyed, taken over by orthodox, very fixed, very negative thoughts. Call them Salafi, call them whatever, Wahhabi, various terminologies which are in usage. But my own experience and my own observation is that the old world culture, old world religious values, old world practices, religious practices. How many times do you say the namaz, the prayers? Where do you say your prayers? What do you call those prayers? Even the names have changed. Today when proclamations are issued in the valley, you say from Zuhr to Asr. Now, these are not Kashmiri words. This is again a manifestation of the influences which have come from across and which have destroyed our traditional values, our secular, inclusive values, and it has replaced them by sectarian philosophies which have also involved ethnic cleansing of certain communities. Now, all this has led over the years to the inter-community relations being destroyed, to societal harmony being totally eroded, with the spread of extremist and fundamentalist philosophies, propagation of such convictions has led to a sea change insofar as the lives of the ordinary persons are concerned. When I was in school in Lahore, which is now Pakistan, a mosque used to be virtually a societal center. It was not merely a place for prayers and only one community could go there and nobody else. It was also a place where education was imparted by the Imam, the Maulvi, the Clergy who was looking after the mosque. And during a certain period, during the Second War, when there was disruption in Lahore and in our family life, I studied for more than a short while in one of these schools, now defamed by the word madrasa. these institutions imparted education. They also imparted after the 5th class rudiments of religious education, which was by no means negative, which was by no means fundamental. So those who wanted to become clergies, they pursued that direction, others went to other schools. But today, with the influences which have come from other countries, the Wahhabi factor, even the old and young don't play together. They don't pray together in the same mosque. They don't pray in the same style. We have near 9,000 mosques in the valley, much larger number than perhaps necessary. Many of them are new. Monies for constructing them have come from where they have come. Those who preach at these places are not all conventional preachers. And they impart unsupervised religious education to young Muslim children. They create a sense of negativity and induct this, that the aspirations of the faith could and perhaps should be achieved through violence. This was never the case in the years gone by. This leads to creating schools of thought which involve the rejection of democracy, rejection of liberal values. And it's ironical that this increased focus on religiosity does not necessarily lead to increase in piety. We are not producing more pious people. On the contrary, we are producing a much higher level of orthodoxy, a much higher level of negativity, and certain beliefs which are irrational. I give you an example. A few months ago, in our country, certain incident took place of bovine slaughter. These news spread to Kashmir. There was some resentment, some annoyance, some anger. And the net result after a few weeks of this upsurge was the propagation of a belief. And you can judge for yourself the rationality of propagating that bovine slaughter is a religious duty. Now in our country, large country, beef is produced, beef is consumed. Beef is consumed not by one community but by many communities. Beef is exported from India. And now to say that it is religious duty is the extent of carrying a religious conviction far too far. Now, having said that, I would say that what Al-Qaeda has done in the years past, the emergence of ISIS, Daesh, the jihadism which is taken root and been active in several parts of the world, is a global threat. And as Director General Prasad mentioned just now, we have radical websites. We have internet-based channels which spread propaganda, which is very perverse, which is very negative, which is false, which spreads hatred, which incites violence, but yet is very effective. We have web-based recruiters, and this is leading, as he mentioned a little while ago, to people from South and Central India, educated, coming from good families, economic status. They are self-radicalized. They perhaps never been near a mosque, they never met a mullah, but all this through social media, they have made their commitments. Now this phenomena is affecting Muslims all over the world, particularly the young. And we have to salvage the young. We have to engage with the young because we cannot allow their lives to go waste. Now there are several factors which don't allow us to do that, which are the factors we need to counter institutionally, nationally, regionally, globally, is this foreign funding. And the funding which supports radicalization, funding which supports terrorism. And the other factor is the role of media. And associated with the role of media is the more vital role of social media. And when I say social media, it is perhaps not so easy to tackle it, because all the social media domains, the major domains, the Twitter and the Facebook and whatnot, they're all located in the Western world. And I do not know to what extent all of us countries which are suffering, which are involved, which are bearing the brunt, to what extent can we persuade those who own and manage these domains, these channels, to cooperate and see that social media does not carry out negative, false, and perverse propaganda which is causing so much havoc around the world. The next point I'll make very briefly is that countries in South Asia particularly, countries in Southeast Asia, countries in the Middle East, West Asia, I think we need to get together very close cooperation to revive the conventional, traditional Islam, Islamic teachings, Islamic faith, Islamic values. In this collective effort, the clergy has to play a very important role, because the word of the clergy goes far for good reason. We have to revive and reconnect with the old philosophical Sufi traditions, Sufi schools of thought, to counter the extremist discourse. And the word of the clergy goes very far, and we have to use the learned clergy, scholars, the clerics, religious scholars, historians, to get together and raise their collective voice from whichever country they come. And we have to mobilize collective action to engage youth, all our youth in all our countries. And as Ambassador Prasad said, you cannot have a patent approach. You have to be area-specific, community-specific, country-specific, region-specific. You have to use the idiom of the youth. So we have to get together community leaders, eminent Muslim community leaders, religious leaders, clerics, mullahs, maulvis, and we have to build a counter-narrative, a counter-discourse. In this entire process, the educational system is of extreme importance, because through the system enough damage has been done. We have to undo the damage also using the system. De-radicalization is easier said than done. It causes a great deal of damage. It erodes, it destroys. So how do you de-radicalize? First of all and foremost, I think it involves total cooperation, total understanding between countries, let's say countries in South Asia. And then we expand this and go forwards, eastwards and northwards. we have to carry out this kind of activity virtually as a campaign, as an operation, and not merely make statements and go home, because this is a grave threat to the future of humanity if terrorism spreads and takes root in many other parts of the world than where it already exists. Now, I'm not here today, this morning, to praise or blame or to utilize this occasion to say things which perhaps need not be said. But I think since we are talking of terrorism, it does need to be said that our Western neighbor has been encouraging a number of terrorist groups which are focused on India, which are anti-India. They establish modules. They have established more particularly the LET, modules in India, modules in Bangladesh, modules on the borders of India and Myanmar, radicalization of the Rohingyas. The LET trainers have been active in the India-Myanmar borders, the Myanmar-Thailand borders, the Chittagong hill tracts, and other centers, and this has created many problems. Now, unfortunately, for about a year now, almost 2 years since 2015, in Afghanistan also we find increasing footprint of the anti-India terrorist groups, JEM, LET, the Al-Badr Mujahideen. They've been fighting with the Taliban against the Afghan forces. There have been attacks in 2 Indian consulates in the past year. So there is a growing threat to India. Another threat or fear or concern which I would like to refer to relates to a factual ground situation, and that is that as the Daesh, Al-Qaeda, they get pressurized on the ground in Syria and Iraq. And as it always happens in such situations, some of the hardened elements, they have come to Afghanistan, or more will come in the coming time. And they are concentrating, joining hands with the Taliban, could create even more serious situation in Afghanistan. And there was obvious concern that such a situation will also affect the neighboring Central Asian states, which have the potential of being influenced and create large-scale chaos in the entire region. Such a situation would not leave India immune, not leave India isolated, unaffected. Now, having said all this, I would conclude by saying that why have we so far failed to deal with this situation which has grown from year to year, both radicalization process and terrorism. The growth of fundamentalism, growth of extremism has led to growth of terrorism. Terrorism can perhaps manifest itself without being preceded by radicalization. But now in the past decade and a half, it is clear that there is a very close, vital connectivity nexus between these two phenomena. And why we have not been able to evolve and present a unified global response is because of our state-wise national expediencies. What suits us does not suit our Western neighbor. what suits our Western neighbor doesn't suit us. So we form approaches and policies founded in geopolitical parameters. This has led in the past years to this good versus bad terrorism. One country is terrorist, another country is freedom fighter. What appears to be terrorism to one country is fighting for freedom for another. So I would say that with the experience which so far in Europe, in Paris, in Dhaka, in India, elsewhere, there is no scope left for debating any further. That there is a global problem, a global threat, and we need to have global cooperation and global convergence if we want to fight terrorism effectively. Mr. Prasad had briefly mentioned again to what India started, the great initiative with which in the early years, early 90s, before the CCIT was presented to UN, introduced in the UN, some of us, including myself, we were working on the draft along with our colleagues, experts from the Foreign Office, the intelligence agencies, the police, and so on. This is the Comprehensive Convention, CCIT, which was introduced in 1996 and remained under discussion till, well, almost 15, 16 years, till 2013. This year in September, India has again reintroduced, brought fresh focus on this important matter. I do not know how long it will take for some kind of understanding of how to define terrorism, how to accept what needs to be done to root out terrorism, root and branch, how to make cross-border terrorism an extraditable offense, how to delegitimize terrorism as a tool of politics, as an instrument of policy, as has happened in the past years. Countries concerned have found it convenient to attribute terrorism to non-state actors. This is not only naive, it is very irresponsible, it is escapist. Terrorism, no terrorist group can survive a day without financial support, without availability of weaponry, without logistical support, and so on. Now, of course, the international terrorist groups have vast resources. They act more speedily than any uniform force anywhere in the world. They have the element of surprise on their side. They always win. And I would again agree with the Master Prasad that merely military responses will no longer do. They're no longer adequate, no longer sufficient. We have to eradicate, de-radicalize almost all spheres of activity, social, cultural, religious, economic, political, if we are to wage a war against terrorism. Not only should CCIT become a reality, but I would say that meanwhile, we need regional counter-terrorist policies, action plans, actual implementation. We need intra-regional cooperation so that the whole world can be covered in course of time to effectively counter terrorism, to root it out. This would also involve not only convergence in the diplomatic arena, it would involve very close cooperation, intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing amongst our countries if we are to deal with terrorism. Because of the time factor, I would not say much more, except to once again reiterate that in view of the Indian experience, in view of what has been happening in Kashmir for the last nearly 3 decades now, what is happening till this morning, we need to take a very serious, grave view, not nationally, but together, regionally, intra-regionally, and worldwide, to accept that there is a grave problem, a threat to the civilizational moorings of human life, and to then combat this scourge with our collective might. Thank you very much.